everyone, I'm Sharon from Teal Duck Craft and Sew, and today this is lesson number 2 on how to knit. So today we're going to do the knit stitch. So if you watched our previous video, you noticed how to cast on using the long tail cast on method. And so here I've cast on 20 stitches, and remember your first loop that you put on, that slip knot, is also considered one of the stitches. So now I'm gonna start to show you how to do the knit stitch. So the first thing we're gonna do, and since I am right-handed, I'm gonna put my yarn that needs to be knit on my left hand, and the working yarn where I'm going to be working is going to be on my right side here. So the first thing I'm going to do for a knit stitch is, once again, we got to make sure that these stitches are nice and on here and they can move a little bit. Remember, you didn't want it too tight or too loose. Then the first thing we're going to do for knitting is we're going to take our other needle, and notice I've now transferred to needles, not my colored pencil. So the knit stitch, we actually knit going from the front to the back, and we do this at an angle going towards the right. So the first thing I'm going to do is you see this first little loop, I'm putting my needle going this way. Now it definitely loosened it up quite a bit, but I can snug that up by holding on to my tail and to my yarn. Now you want to make sure that when you are knitting that you do have just a little bit of tension on the working yarn here. Otherwise, it's going to get too uneven. And so what I typically do is just lightly wrap it around my pinky finger, or some people wrap it around their pointer finger. And I just hold it lightly so it just has a little bit of tension to it, so it's not super loose. Once I inserted it now into that first loop, I'm going to wind it around that back, or my working needle here. Then I'm going to take this, and notice what I'm doing. I'm coming back up through that needle with the stitch, and I'm going to pull it on through. Let me do that again. So I'm putting it, notice I'm putting it here, all right? It's going towards the back, towards the right. I'm gonna take my working yarn, wrap it around that back needle, and I have to pull on it just a little bit to have some tension. I'm not pulling on it very hard. Now I'm gonna take my needle and I'm gonna go back underneath where I came from, and then I'm gonna take it off the hook, or the needle here. Let's do it again. In to the back, around, and then I'm gonna pull it back right where I was, and then off the hook. All right, so I'm gonna do this a few times so you can kind of see what, oops, I missed that one, and that's okay. All right, so I'm gonna put it around. I'm going to go through that loop and off. All right, and you can see we're starting to create that stitch. And notice how I'm holding my needles here. I'm holding the needles and I'm holding the yarn close to the edges because I don't want a very big gap here. Otherwise, this is going to be all uneven. So I go from here, I'm taking it on the left side, and I'm going to the right behind it. Around, I'm going to go through and come back right up there and off. From the left side, going to the right in the back, around, and I'm going to bring it all the way around here. Alrighty, so let's take a look and let's finish this row here, because I want to show you something really important. And when I first started knitting, honestly, the first row is the hardest to get started, And that's because a lot of us, when we cast on so snug that it's hard for us to get those needles underneath that loop there. So usually that first row is a little snugger than the rest of them. But you want to try to keep that same tension, try to make the same movements, and it's going to take some practice. It really does. Just because you're seeing that this is a knit stitch doesn't mean you're ready to go right into a big project where you're going to be getting some really nice yarn. But you really need to practice. So you need to crawl before you walk in most cases. And so in this case, we just need to practice our knitting stitch. All right, I'm at the end here. So here I'm going to do this, put this in here. Now there's something I want you to pay attention to. All right, I'm going to put this needle down. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is they take this yarn and they loop it around and then they come back. What I just did is I added an additional stitch here. I don't want to do that. So when I'm doing that, keep this down here, okay? So always kind of pull it down to the right. Now it's going to look like it's a big, loop there. Like, oh, all these other ones look kind of nice, but this is big loop here. Don't worry about that. Once you start knitting the next row, that's going to be taken up in there. So be careful. Don't wrap it around when you're turning because you're adding an extra stitch then. And that's how we get off with our stitches. And you wonder, how do I know that? That was one of my biggest mistakes too. All right, so let's do it again. So here I am, I'm at the end. I'm putting a little tension here. I'm going from the left back to the right side. I'm pulling it through and off. Okay, and now I'm snugging it up a little because it was that first stitch. All right, through, around, and then here we go, and off. Through, around, back, and off. Through, around, go back, and off. All right, through, around, back, and off. Now I'm going to finish knitting this row because I want you to see the pattern that is starting. What is happening here is on this side that we are doing the active knitting, going from the left hand needle to the right hand needle, we are doing a knit stitch. But the opposite of a knit stitch is called a purl stitch. So what is happening on the other side of this material that I am creating here is every time I'm knitting a row, on the back side, it's coming across as a purl. So let's take a look here. So that means every time I turn my knitting around, I'm going to have a row of knitting and a row of purling showing through. All right, here's my last one. Here and around and off. Be very careful. Don't whip it around there. All right, bring it back down. All right, look what's happening here. Okay, I just got through knitting everything. Now, how do I know the difference between a knit stitch and a purl stitch? The knit, when you look at it, where the loop ends, it's going to look like a little V is next to it. You see that little V right next at the base of that loop? But when we look on the other side, at the base of that loop, there's a little purl that goes around it. It kind of bumps up like a little purl. And that's what's happening here, because the opposite of a knit stitch going one way, the back side of it is a purl stitch. When you do enough of these going back and forth, this is actually what they refer to as a garter stitch. So a garter stitch is when you're knitting every single row. All right, so I just did that first one. Need a little bit more tension to keep going. And this is getting easier and easier because I'm past that first cast on row there. All right, so I'm going in to the back of the right and going through, in, and I'm going from the front and I'm wrapping around the back. All right, so let me finish this one row and we'll look at it. Now, if you want to keep practicing with this, which I highly recommend, what I would do, depending on the weight of your yarn, you want to take a look at if you've got worsted weight or you've got maybe chunky weight yarn. You might want to put on, oh, I don't know, anywhere between, I have 20 stitches here and mine is a bulky weight yarn. If you have a bulky, I would say maybe put on maybe 50 stitches and just keep practicing back and forth. So cast on 50. And what's going to happen is when you get to the end, and you just keep going back and forth, you could make yourself something that's very handy in the kitchen, and you could make yourself a little scrub pad. All right, so this is 20. Actually, 20 might even be pretty good. So remember, don't put that loop around. Keep it over here. And what's nice about this is it's going to be a nice even stitch as we go. The edges will be very nice also. And so this is the opposite. I just got through knitting them all on here, and be careful, like pull it down and see what's next to it at the bottom, because it might look like there's the loops here, but when you pull it down, you see the little V's. That's the knit stitch. Over here, when I pull it down, it's just the little purls right next to it at the end. Okay, and that's the purl stitch. So it's the opposite on the other side. And once you know the knit stitch and the purl stitch, you can pretty much make anything you want, because those are the two basic stitches to start with. And so if you watch my next video, I'm going to go through how to do the purl stitch. So once again, my name is Sharon. I'm from Teal Duck Craft and Sew. I'd appreciate it if you could like this video and hit follow, and I'll see you next time for part 3, the purl stitch.